It began in the great chamber of the Galactic Council, a place that for centuries had been called the Heart of Peace. A hall carved into the hollow of a massive asteroid floating above a blue star, its walls covered in gold and crystal, symbols of 1,000 empires that had sworn to protect balance among the stars. Delegates of every race filled the tiers, their faces shimmering beneath the white light, their voices hushed but heavy with expectation, because today was not just another session of politics, it was Judgment Day for the species called human. At the center of that enormous hall stood a single man, the human ambassador, Marcus Hale. His uniform was simple, black with the silver crest of Earth upon his chest, but the strength in his posture carried the weight of an entire civilization. Around him, alien eyes glowed with disdain, amusement, or fear, for they had all gathered to vote on one thing: whether humanity still had a place in the galactic order. The Chancellor, a towering crystalline being whose voice resonated like breaking glass, raised his hand for silence. "The motion is clear," he said. "The Terran species has violated too many accords. Their weapons grow beyond regulation, their colonies spread without restraint, and their soldiers show no loyalty to the Council. We can no longer trust them to abide by peace." A murmur filled the room, thousands of whispers echoing like distant thunder. Hale remained still, his expression unreadable. He had heard the accusations before, every word, every insult. Humanity had always been feared, not for its cruelty, but for its unpredictability. They adapted too fast, recovered too easily, and survived what others could not. To the older empires of the galaxy, that was not strength, it was chaos disguised as progress. The Chancellor's assistant stepped forward, his voice formal and cold. "The Council will now proceed to vote. Those in favor of expelling Earth from the galactic order, raise your sigils." Slowly, lights began to glow around the chamber, rows upon rows of blue, gold, and red symbols lighting up in unison. First hundreds, then thousands. The hum of energy filled the air as the chamber counted. Hale's jaw tightened. He already knew the result. The Council had made its decision long before this day. Finally, the Chancellor looked up. 712 votes in favor, he declared. 1 vote opposed. The silence that followed felt like a storm holding its breath. All eyes turned to the far right of the hall where a single voice broke the stillness. Against. It was Ambassador Varys of the Clyran Dominion, an ancient insectoid species that had once fought beside humans during the War of the Broken Moons. "I vote against this motion," he said firmly, his many eyes narrowing at the Chancellor. "You fear humanity because they refuse to bow, not because they threaten peace." The chamber erupted in outrage, shouts echoing through the tiers. "Traitor!" someone screamed. "He sides with the primitives." Another voice snarled, "He'll bring ruin on us all." Guards began to move toward Varys, but he raised one hand in defiance. "History will remember this day," he said, "and it will remember who stood for truth and who hid behind fear." The guards dragged him out of the chamber as the Chancellor slammed his crystal hand against the podium. "The motion passes," he announced. "Earth is hereby expelled from the Galactic Council. Effective immediately." The words rang through the chamber like a sentence passed by the gods themselves. Hale stood unmoving. He did not speak, did not shout, did not beg. For a long moment, the hall seemed to hold its breath. Then, with quiet precision, he adjusted his uniform, his expression calm. "You think this ends us," he said softly, his voice carrying through the entire chamber. "But it only ends your peace." The words hung in the air like a knife before the storm. Gasps rippled through the delegates, followed by angry roars. Guards stepped forward to seize him, but by the time they reached the center, the platform was empty. He was gone, transported out by Terran technology faster than the Council sensors could react. The Chancellor shouted for lockdown, but it was too late. Humanity had just walked out of the galaxy's Grand Court. Across the stars, the broadcast of the vote spread like wildfire. Every human world, every colony, every outpost received the same image. Their ambassador standing alone, their flag dimming on the Council floor, and the words expelled from the galactic order flashing across the screen. On Mars, factory workers stopped their machines and stared in silence. On Titan, soldiers paused their drills and lowered their weapons. On Luna, a child asked her father what expelled meant, and the man could not find the words to answer. There were no riots, no protests, no public speeches. Only a quiet, collective stillness that spread through the entire species like a cold wave. For the first time in a century, the Terran fleet received no new orders, no commands. The great engines orbiting Jupiter went dark. Earth's transmissions to the outer colonies ceased. The human networks that once buzzed with life and trade fell silent. The galaxy mistook that silence for defeat. The Chancellor of the Council announced it as a victory for peace. Humanity has been contained, he declared during a broadcast, his voice proud. The balance of the stars is safe once again. Applause filled the chamber. But there was one thing no one noticed. Every relay station near Terran space had gone offline. Not damaged, not destroyed, but shut down deliberately from within. The human fleet had vanished from the trade routes. Civilian ships stopped responding to scans. Even the colonies beyond Sol sent their last message, "We are closing the gates." Then nothing. Weeks passed. The Council congratulated itself on a swift resolution. News channels across alien worlds portrayed humans as defeated, isolated, irrelevant. But there were whispers. Pilots spoke of seeing shadows moving beyond the border. Merchant convoys swore they saw flashes of light on the edge of dark space. Brief, silent bursts that made stars blink. It's just debris, the Council's scientists said. Their technology is collapsing without our oversight. But in the depths of the Terran Command Core beneath Luna's surface, something ancient and forgotten was stirring. Admiral Sarah Kor, commander of the Terran Defense Network, stood in the center of a massive chamber filled with silver light. Around her, hundreds of technicians worked in silence, their eyes fixed on the glowing symbols of activation codes that had not been used in over 200 years. "We've been given full clearance," her second-in-command whispered. Kor stared at the central console, her face calm, her voice steady. "Confirm authorization from Earth Prime," she ordered. There was a pause, then a soft chime. A message appeared on the central display. 2 words only. They voted. The chamber went silent. No one spoke. No one moved. Then Kor nodded once. "Begin the sequence." Deep within Earth's orbit, massive stations began to hum, ancient systems awakening for the first time since the Great War. The Terran fleet, scattered across hundreds of colonies, received the same command at the same instant. Engines flared. Weapons powered. But no one transmitted a word. Humanity didn't respond to the Council's decision with protests or negotiations. They simply vanished from sight. The largest migration of ships in recorded history occurred without a single communication, without a single signal traceable by the Council. Humanity went dark, not in surrender, but in preparation. In the Great Chamber, the Chancellor received the reports of human silence with smug satisfaction. "They've cut themselves off," he said. "A civilization of children throwing tantrums. Soon, they'll starve without trade." But across the galaxy, the first signs of change had already begun. On the outer edges of Dominion space, observatories detected something strange. A wave of energy unlike anything they'd seen, moving through the void, silent, invisible to most senses, but powerful enough to bend light. It passed through stars, through dust clouds, through planets, leaving no trace, only stillness. Then one night, an entire communication network went offline. No explosion, no damage, just gone. And somewhere far beyond the Council's reach, in a sector long abandoned, the Terran fleet gathered. Thousands of ships, black as the void, formed into a formation so vast it seemed like a second night sky. Admiral Kor stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Erebus, watching the stars vanish behind the fleet's energy shields. "We've waited centuries to be heard," she said, her voice echoing through the bridge. "Now they will listen." And as the fleet began to move, the stars themselves seemed to shudder, their light bending around the silent armada. Back in the Council chamber, the Chancellor received the first emergency signal, an outpost on the edge of human space reporting unidentified signatures approaching. The message was brief, filled with static. Unknown fleet, multiple contacts. Not responding. There, the transmission ended in static. Minutes later, a second report came in from a neighboring system. Then a third. Within an hour, every border world that had once voted against Earth had gone silent. The Council's chambers descended into panic. Delegates shouted, calling for reinforcements, but their fleets were too far, too slow, too blind. The Chancellor slammed his hand on the table, demanding calm. Humanity wouldn't dare, he said. They wouldn't risk total war. But he was wrong. Humanity wasn't waging war. They were delivering consequence. For years, the galaxy had called them dangerous, emotional, unpredictable. Now, they would learn what those words truly meant. And so it began, not with armies, not with invasions, but with silence. Communication relays fell dark. Patrol fleets vanished. Stars dimmed as if refusing to witness what came next. The Terran fleet didn't broadcast demands. They didn't explain their actions. They simply moved, and wherever they went, light followed them into darkness. The galaxy had cast its vote, and now Earth had answered. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't hatred. It was justice written in the language of stars, and by the time the Council realized what had begun, the first of their worlds had already gone cold. The great chamber that had once declared Earth's expulsion stood empty now, its seats abandoned, its banners burned by the silence of their own arrogance. The echo of Marcus Hale's final words lingered in every corridor. You think this ends us, it only ends your peace. And somewhere, far beyond the ruins of the Council's pride, Earth waited in silence, watching the galaxy it once tried to join crumble beneath the weight of its own vote. The galaxy mistook the Terran silence for surrender, and that was their first mistake, because silence had always been humanity's most dangerous weapon, the kind that came before storms, before invasions, before history changed forever, and now that silence had returned, spreading across the stars like an invisible tide, trade. Convoys that once glittered through Terran space vanished without trace. Colonies that once answered Council requests no longer transmitted anything at all. Their signals cut clean as if they had never existed. But what truly unsettled the galaxy wasn't the absence of contact. It was the absence of noise, no distress calls, no resistance, just a kind of void so complete it felt alive, and in that quiet, the Council congratulated itself on its wisdom. The Chancellor stood before the Assembly. Proud and satisfied, the Terrans have withdrawn, he said. They have accepted their fate, balance is restored. His words echoed through the great chamber, met with applause from species that had never truly understood what it meant to face Earth. But in the shadows beyond their reach, humanity was not retreating, they were preparing. On Luna's dark side, deep beneath the surface where sunlight had never touched, the Terran Defense Command Core glowed with the light of 1,000 screens. Admiral Sarah Core stood before the central console, her reflection sharp in the glass as activation codes scrolled in silent streams across the walls. Confirm Earth Prime authorization, she ordered, her voice calm but cold. Her officers waited, no one breathed. Then the message came through the encrypted line. 2 words that would ignite a storm across the galaxy. They voted, Ko's eyes hardened. Then so do we, she said quietly, and with a single motion, she placed her hand on the console, initiating a chain of events that no alien could ever stop. Across the Sol system, great orbital stations awoke, ancient engines buried beneath Mars began to hum, and the moon's hidden shipyards opened like mechanical flowers, releasing ships that had been asleep for centuries, black-hulled vessels that shimmered faintly with energy so dense it distorted light itself. The Terran fleet was not building. They had already built, waiting for this very day. Humanity had learned long ago that peace was temporary, but vengeance was patient. While the Council celebrated, fleets of human warships slipped quietly from the system, their engines silent, their signals cloaked in fields of distortion that even the Dominion's most advanced sensors could not detect. Entire battlegroups vanished beyond the event horizons of the frontier, into regions of deep space no map had ever named, their mission unknown, their destination classified, and still Earth spoke no words. Their diplomats were recalled, their colonies closed their gates, and even civilian communications ceased. The galaxy began to grow uneasy. Merchants whispered of ghost ships appearing in the black, of stars flickering as if someone had swallowed their light. Superstition, said the Council's scientists, space anomalies. said their admirals, but every world that had once traded with Earth began to pull its fleets inward, because even those who laughed could feel it. The air in the void had changed. The stars seemed to watch in silence. Admiral Kor walked the length of the command bridge aboard her flagship Erebus, the first of the Leviathan-class dreadnoughts, its hull black as glass, absorbing every photon that touched it. The crew stood ready, disciplined, no one cheered, no one smiled, because they all understood what was coming. "They think we're contained," she said quietly, her voice echoing through the steel corridors. "They think this is an ending." She paused, her eyes fixed on the holographic projection of the galaxy. "But we never end, we adapt, we remember, and when we remember, the stars burn." The officers around her remained still, only the hum of the ship's reactor filled the silence. "Prepare the fleets," she ordered. "The Council took our place in their heavens, now we'll take away the heavens themselves." Her hand touched the control plate, and the great engines of the Erebus came alive, roaring like a storm across the dark, yet outside, nothing could be seen. The fleet had entered full spectral concealment, invisible to everything but gravity itself. Humanity had become the shadow between the stars. Back in the council chamber, the Chancellor and his ministers discussed economics and diplomacy, oblivious to the storm now spreading toward them. "They are isolating themselves into irrelevance," one delegate said. "Without trade, without support, they'll collapse." Another laughed. "Humans need the galaxy more than the galaxy needs them." And the Chancellor nodded, his crystal form glinting in the artificial light. "In time, their pride will fade. They will beg for reinstatement," he said. Confidently, but he was wrong, because humanity did not beg. They built, on Titan, massive forges worked without rest, hammering the alloy frames of warships designed to survive black holes. On Neptune's orbit, the Aegis array came online, a ring the size of a moon, pulsing with quiet energy, its purpose known only to the highest command. And on Earth itself, every factory, every research lab, every mind was focused on one purpose: to remember the vote and ensure no one ever dared to repeat it. A month after the vote, the first Council patrol disappeared, a small fleet of 15 ships that had entered Terran space to verify compliance. Their last transmission came through a static-filled channel. Contact with unknown vessel. No response, energy reading, too high. Then silence, no explosion, no wreckage, no distress beacon. They were simply gone. Sensors later detected gravitational distortion in the area, the kind that could only be caused by massive energy manipulation, perhaps a natural anomaly, the Council scientists said, but in private, the admirals began to worry, because this was not the first time something like this had happened. Over the next few weeks, more patrols vanished, border stations stopped transmitting, and even pirate ships reported ghost signatures near human borders, ships that appeared and disappeared within seconds, leaving no trace, no signal, no survivors. One pirate vessel recorded a brief image, a human dreadnought gliding through the void. Like a shadow, its engines dead, its hull unmarked, its lights cold and white. The ship did not fire, it simply passed by, and the pirate systems shut down completely. Their recording ended with a single line of Terran text burned into the data core: "You voted." When the Chancellor received the report, he dismissed it as a fabrication, a fear tactic, but that night, he dreamed of dark skies and burning suns. He awoke in cold silence, feeling for the first time that perhaps they had gone too far. But his pride would not allow him to admit it. He ordered more patrols, stronger fleets, and demanded the borders be reinforced. Yet none of it mattered, because the Terrans were already inside, their ships hidden in gravitational folds that no alien could detect, their weapons charged, their fleets surrounding systems that didn't even know they were targets. The galaxy believed humanity had vanished, but in truth, humanity had surrounded them, watching, waiting, counting, and preparing to strike when the time was right. On Mars, within a darkened chamber lined with glowing steel, Admiral Kor stood beside the human ambassador, Marcus Hale, the man who had been humiliated before the Council, his once calm eyes now like glass, cold, hard, reflecting fire. "You warned them," she said quietly, "and they still mocked you." Hale nodded. "They thought we'd bow, Sarah," he replied. "They thought fear was our weakness, but fear has always been our teacher." He looked out toward the holographic stars. The vote wasn't their judgment of us, it was our permission to remember what we are. Kor smiled faintly, a tired, dangerous smile. "And what are we?" she asked. Hale's answer came like a whisper: "The storm that ends empires." At that same moment, the first phase of Operation Eclipse began. Black fleets emerging from deep space with no light, no warning, no sound. Their approach invisible to every sensor in the galaxy. They didn't fire yet. They didn't need to. Their presence alone warped the gravity of nearby systems, bending space like a silent blade, and across the galaxy, stars flickered, suns dimmed, and worlds began to wonder if night had finally come for them. The Council met in emergency session. The Chancellor trembling, "What are they doing?" he demanded. No one could answer. Because none of them had seen a Terran in weeks. No one even knew where Earth's fleet had gone. And yet their destruction was already unfolding around them. Slow, deliberate. Unstoppable, and it had all begun with a single vote. The first strike came without warning, without light, without even the courtesy of sound. It was not war as the galaxy understood it. It was correction, silent and perfect. It began on the Dominion's border world of Valkyries, a planet of silver oceans and glass cities, home to the very species that had pushed hardest for Earth's expulsion. Their suns burned bright. Their fleets patrolled confidently, unaware that above them, in the void where no sensor could see, humanity was waiting. The first Terran strike group hung in absolute silence. Thousands of ships drifting in shadow, their black hulls reflecting nothing, their engines dead. The crew watching the planet below. Admiral Sarah Kor stood on the bridge of her flagship Erebus. Her voice a whisper carried through the void. "They voted for our exile," she said, "so we will vote with fire." And with that, the first command left her lips. Initiate eclipse. The world below never saw it coming. One moment its capital sky was filled with the pale light of morning. The next it dimmed as though something had passed before the sun. Then the air cracked, not with thunder, but with silence too deep to be real. The stars above disappeared, and when they returned, Valkyries was gone. Its oceans boiled away. Its cities turned to black glass. The entire system collapsed into a sphere of nothing, not explosion, not radiation, just absence. The Dominion fleets rushed to investigate, but their ships vanished as they entered orbit, leaving behind only drifting fragments of light frozen in space. When the Council received the first reports, they called it an accident, a cosmic anomaly. But accidents don't leave words carved across moons. Yet there they were, visible from orbit, etched in molten stone by precision bombardment. You voted. Panic spread through the Council worlds. Senators shouted in disbelief. Ministers argued that humanity didn't have the power to erase entire systems. But deep down, they knew they had underestimated the Terrans. Because while the Council had been bickering over trade laws and status, humanity had been building, perfecting, evolving. They had hidden their true power behind diplomacy, their real strength behind patience. And now the mask was gone. On the second day, 3 more systems went silent. Not conquered, not occupied, erased. Whole fleets sent to respond were swallowed by gravitational distortions no one could track. They're using black hole weaponry. A scientist screamed during the emergency session. "That's impossible." Another shouted. "You think humans care about impossible?" Came the bitter reply. In the heart of the Terran Command Corps, beneath the lunar surface, Marcus Hale stood before the Global War Council. The only light coming from the holographic map of the galaxy, half of it already flickering red. "They're panicking," Admiral Kor said. "Their fleets are scattering. They don't even know where to strike back." Hale's voice was quiet, even calm. "Good, let them run. Let them understand what fear feels like when it has nowhere to hide." One of the younger officers turned to him. Hesitation in his eyes. "Sir, when do we stop?" Hale looked at the stars and said simply, "When they remember." Humanity didn't destroy out of anger. They destroyed out of memory. And there is nothing more dangerous in the universe than a memory sharpened into justice. The Council tried to respond, sending reconnaissance ships, spies, and peace envoys, but all attempts vanished. One envoy managed to transmit a single message before their ship was silenced. "We found nothing," it said. Just the sound of breathing in the dark. The Council chamber fell into chaos. Their Chancellor slammed his crystalline fist against the table, cracks running down his shimmering body. "They will bring ruin to us all," he shouted. But one of his aides whispered, "They already have," because at that very moment, another sun had gone dark, its light cut clean as if someone had stolen it from existence. It wasn't random. Each world erased had been one that had voted to expel Earth. The galaxy began to understand what was happening. This wasn't war. This was judgment written in mathematics, precision, and silence. News spread across the outer colonies, whole systems vanishing, not destroyed by bombs or plasma fire, but by gravity itself folding inward. The Council's scientists called it stellar implosion. But the soldiers knew better. The Terrans had weaponized physics itself, turning stars into weapons of erasure, and they were using them like signatures, each one a reminder that Earth was not gone. It was everywhere. Admiral Core stood on her bridge, eyes reflecting the ghostly light of the dying suns. "You think they'll surrender?" one of her officers asked. "They won't," she said. "They'll hide behind their pride until the last light goes out." The officer hesitated, "And when it does?" Core's voice dropped lower, her tone like iron. "Then they'll finally understand what it means to stand in the dark with us." Within days, chaos spread beyond control. Council fleets refused to follow orders. Worlds shut down their own communications to avoid being tracked. Ambassadors fled their capitals, and still, no human voice was heard, no demands, no ultimatums, only silence and consequence. One alien general described it perfectly in his final report before his world vanished. "We are not fighting a species," he wrote. "We are fighting inevitability." But the Council refused to stop. They believed if they gathered their forces, they could crush Earth before the Terrans reached their core systems. "Launch Operation Purity," the Chancellor commanded. "We will burn their homeworld before they burn ours." And so began the largest fleet movement in galactic history, over 40,000 ships, a wall of fire stretching across the void. Their engines roaring as they moved towards Sol. The aliens cheered, believing the war would finally turn. But their cheers didn't last long. Halfway to their destination, the fleet encountered something the sensors could not define. A structure so massive it defied logic, floating near Neptune's orbit, its surface black as obsidian, its shape a ring of shifting metal and light. The Aegis Array, humanity's last creation, their final deterrent, born from the ashes of old wars and built for one purpose: to remind the galaxy that Earth could unmake what it had once made. As the alien fleet approached, the array activated, waves of energy, rippling through space like the heartbeat of a god. Communications failed, engines stalled, navigation collapsed, and in a moment of pure, perfect silence, the entire Council Armada vanished. Their ships turned to particles of dust drifting through the solar winds. No wreckage, no survivors, just quiet. When the message reached the Council, the Chancellor stood frozen before the screen, the lights of his chamber flickering as if even the building feared the truth. How is this possible?" he whispered. His advisors stared in horror. "They erased 40,000 ships." One said, voice shaking. "They didn't even fight back, they just erased them." Outside the window, the stars seemed dimmer than before, and for the first time, the Chancellor realized what the human ambassador had meant. That their vote had not ended humanity, it had ended peace itself, and that peace, now broken, could never be repaired. From that moment on, the galaxy would no longer speak of humans as an equal species. They would speak of them as a force, an inevitable truth, the quiet that follows arrogance, the fire that ends empires, and the shadow that moves when stars go dark. The war that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever known. Not a clash of armies, not the thunder of fleets in open battle, but a slow, deliberate unraveling of everything the Council had built. The galaxy's greatest powers found themselves fighting an enemy they could neither see nor predict, one that struck with precision and vanished before retaliation could even form. The Terran fleet had become a myth, a whisper, an echo that haunted every system that had once cheered for Earth's exile. Planets fortified themselves with weapons of unimaginable power. Orbital defenses glimmered like spider webs around entire worlds, yet none of it mattered, because the humans did not attack fortresses, they didn't storm planets or capture cities, they erased what mattered most. The idea of safety itself. One morning a planet would wake to its sun flickering, and by nightfall, it would be gone, not destroyed, simply erased, its space folded into nothing, leaving behind silence so complete it made survivors lose their minds. In the Council's secret chamber, panic had replaced pride, delegates shouted over one another, their once gleaming robes now dull with exhaustion and fear. "We cannot fight what we cannot see," one screamed. "We must open talks with them," another argued, but the Chancellor, once proud and confident, slammed his crystal hand against the table, his voice cracking under the weight of denial. "We cannot surrender to those barbarians. They will show no mercy." Yet deep inside, he already knew mercy was the one thing humanity no longer had. because mercy had died the moment he raised his hand and voted against Earth. His own guards whispered that they could feel it. The way the air vibrated differently now. The way the stars outside the council hall flickered whenever a Terran ship passed by unseen, and they had passed by, many times. In the ruins of Dominion space, the survivors told stories of black ships that came like shadows, their engines silent, their weapons invisible, their attacks so clean that they left no debris behind, only the scent of ozone and the whisper of gravity. One survivor described seeing them once, ships that did not move through space, but through folds of light itself, as if the universe bent to their will. They didn't fire plasma, didn't launch missiles. They simply opened their hands, and the laws of physics obeyed. They have become gods, one alien captain said before his transmission ended, and gods do not negotiate. The message reached the council only moments before the system it came from vanished entirely, its sun imploding in perfect silence. Meanwhile, in the void between stars, humanity moved with purpose. Fleets coordinated across thousands of light-years as though sharing a single mind. The Terran command network had become something beyond technology. An intelligence woven from billions of human thoughts linked by quantum fields, every ship, every soldier connected to one heartbeat, one will, one purpose. To erase arrogance, Admiral Sarah Kor stood aboard the flagship Erebus. Her eyes locked on the holographic display of the Council's territory, red dots flickering like embers. Every world that raised its hand against us. She said quietly, every system that cheered when we were condemned, mark them. Her officers obeyed. The map darkened one sector at a time. You were right. A voice said behind her, Marcus Hale stepping forward, his once diplomatic uniform now replaced by Terran black command armor, his voice low, cold, precise. They wanted us gone from their galaxy. Kor looked at him. Now we'll give them that galaxy, empty. The Council tried everything, weapons that could split moons, fleets of autonomous drones, EMP fields that stretched across entire star systems. But nothing worked. Their greatest machines shut down before ever reaching human space. Their code scrambled. Their engines melted from within. Someone on the Council finally asked the question none dared to say aloud. How did they do this? How did they become this? The answer came from an old historian who had studied humanity since first contact. They did not become this, he said, trembling. They always were. We just forgot what they were capable of when cornered. His words silenced the chamber, because even the Chancellor knew it was true. For centuries, humanity had been underestimated, their wars dismissed as chaos, their resilience mocked, their emotions ridiculed. But now those same emotions had become their greatest weapon, determination. Sharpened into vengeance, sorrow distilled into precision. And the galaxy was learning what it meant to awaken something that never sleeps. The Council's final defense line was drawn around its capital, a fleet of 15,000 ships encircling the planet, a barrier of firepower unmatched in history. They believed it would be enough, but as the hours passed, the ships began to lose contact with one another. One by one their communications flickered and died, radar readings distorted, long-range scanners failed, panic spread across the ranks. We've lost contact with the Western Defense Line, shouted one commander. The ships are gone. Gone how? Demanded another. Destroyed. No, came the trembling reply. Just gone. Seconds later the Eastern Line vanished too, leaving only silence and static. The commanders stared into their monitors, watching as invisible shapes began to pass through the fleet, blotting out stars as they moved. Fire! Someone screamed. Thousands of plasma cannons erupted into the dark, filling the sky with blinding light, and for a moment, they thought they saw them. Black ships shaped like blades, moving faster than thought. The Terran fleet had arrived. The sky above the Council's capital turned to shadow as the human fleet surrounded it. Their formation perfect, their weapons dormant. They didn't fire, not yet. They just waited, the silence pressing down like a weight. Inside the Council chamber, the delegates trembled. They've come to destroy us, whispered one. Then speak to them, another begged, send a transmission. The Chancellor nodded shakily, his voice breaking as he ordered the communication relay activated. This is the Galactic Council, he said into the void. We seek terms, we surrender. The silence stretched, no reply came, just the hum of static, and then a voice filled every channel, calm, human, unmistakable. You surrender to whom? The Chancellor froze. To the Terran fleet, he stammered, to Earth. There was a pause. Then the voice replied, "There is no Earth. There is only humanity, and you voted it out of existence." The Council's great defense fleet opened fire out of desperation, tens of thousands of weapons igniting the void, but every beam, every missile curved harmlessly away, bending around the black ships like light around a horizon. It was as if the universe itself refused to harm them, and then, as the last alien shouted for retreat, the Terrans answered, not with destruction, but with silence. A deep pulse of energy rippled through the fleet, and all at once, everything stopped, every ship frozen. In place, every engine stilled, every weapon dead. No explosion followed, no screams, only a strange stillness, and when the pulse faded, the stars above the Council world were gone, replaced by an endless black void stretching in all directions. The entire fleet had been folded into a single point and erased from time. The Chancellor fell to his knees as the chamber lights flickered, the air thin with fear. "What are they?" he whispered, but no one answered, because the truth was beyond words. Humanity had become something greater than the galaxy's understanding, no longer conquerors, no longer diplomats. They were balance, the unspoken force that reminded civilizations that peace was not a gift, it was a choice, and when that choice was betrayed, the cost would always be the same. The Chancellor looked toward the sky one last time before the roof shattered in a storm of light, and in the clouds above, he saw them. The silhouette of ships that blotted out the stars, thousands of them, moving in perfect silence, and in that final moment before his world vanished, he finally understood that the humans hadn't come for revenge. They had come to finish the vote the galaxy had started. The fall of the Galactic Council began not with explosions but with whispers, the kind that crawl through the dark corners of frightened minds. In the aftermath of the fleet's disappearance, the remaining worlds were silent. The once glorious council halls now hollow ruins echoing with static transmissions and broken oaths. The survivors tried to rebuild communication, but every signal they sent was met with the same reply. A low human voice repeating the same two words. "You voted." Those words haunted them more than any weapon could. They played across every frequency, on every abandoned world, every station, every home. The phrase burned into the minds of those who once laughed at humanity's plea for fairness. Now those words were a verdict carved into the bones of the galaxy itself. And yet, somewhere deep within the dark between stars, the humans were not celebrating. They were watching, waiting, calculating the cost of what they had done. Admiral Sarah Kor stood on the bridge of the Erebus, the largest Terran warship ever constructed. Though calling it a warship was too small a word for what it had become. Its hull shimmered like shadowed glass, absorbing light, its weapons dormant yet ready, the crew silent. No one dared speak above a whisper, because they were not conquerors, they were witnesses. Status. Kor asked quietly, her eyes locked on the display. "Council communications are completely collapsed," her lieutenant replied. "Their command network no longer exists. Most colonies are uninhabited or offline." Kor nodded slowly, her fingers tightening behind her back. "And the survivors?" "Few, scattered," the officer said. "Some are calling for peace, others are hiding." Kor turned away from the display, her voice soft but sharp as a blade. "Peace is a choice they made impossible, and now we live with the weight of their vote." On the Lunar Command Station, Marcus Hale stood in the same room where, years ago, he had been told the Council's verdict. The chamber was cold, the light dim, but his expression was unreadable. "They wanted to erase us," he said to the officers gathered around him. "So we showed them what erasure feels like." His words were not boastful, not proud. They were tired. His voice carried the heaviness of a man who had seen victory and found no joy in it. Admiral Kor's face appeared on the screen. Before him, "We've ended their leadership, their fleets, their structure, but not their memory," she said. "They will speak of us as monsters now." Hale nodded. "Then let them. Monsters remind the stars of consequences." He walked toward the window, gazing at the pale glow of Earth, a blue orb surrounded by rings of light. The defense platforms that now circled it like guardians. "Do you know what I realized?" he said quietly. "They thought the Council was the galaxy's heart, but the heart was never them. It was the silence we gave them to hear their own arrogance echo back." Meanwhile, far from Sol, the survivors of the Council met in secret. Their meeting held aboard a derelict station orbiting a dying star. The air inside was heavy with despair. Only 7 species remained represented, their numbers a fraction of what they once commanded. "We must make contact," one pleaded. We must show the Terrans that we are not their enemies. Another hissed. They don't see enemies. They see guilt. The Chancellor, now hollow and old, his crystalline body cracked from stress fractures, spoke with a trembling voice. We destroyed ourselves when we voted, when we believed that peace meant control. He looked down at his reflection in the fractured table. We were warned, but we didn't listen, and now we pay. One of the younger delegates slammed his hand against the table. Then fight back, he shouted. They cannot be gods, they bleed like us. But even as he spoke, the lights in the room flickered, a deep hum filled the station, and outside the window, the dying star pulsed once, twice, then went out completely. Darkness fell, and when the emergency lights came on, the young delegate was gone, his seat empty, his name erased from the digital records as if he had never existed. Back in Terran space, scientists and strategists gathered under the Earth Defense Dome, a vast glass structure that overlooked the blue curve of the planet below. They were not celebrating victory, they were calculating survival. Our actions will echo, said Dr. Alara Ives, chief of Terran Analytics. We've destabilized gravitational patterns across 3 sectors. We've erased not only their worlds but the equilibrium that kept the galaxy balanced. Hale stood silently as she continued. If we continue, we could collapse entire star regions. But Admiral Core only replied, then they'll collapse in silence, as we did. Hale turned sharply. Enough, Sarah. This isn't about destruction anymore, it's about choice. The room fell silent, his words heavy. We showed them vengeance. Now we must decide if humanity ends here with it or lives to build something worth the ashes we've made. Across the galaxy, smaller species began sending messages. Pleas for mercy, for forgiveness, for guidance, some addressed to Earth directly, others broadcast into the void hoping humans were still listening. We were forced, they said. We didn't want the vote, we only followed. But the Terrans sent no reply. Their silence became a weapon sharper than any fleet. Whole civilizations waited for the sound of human retaliation that never came, and that waiting became its own kind of punishment. Fear spread faster than war ever could, because every flicker of light in the night sky, every strange pulse on a scanner, every drop in temperature on a distant moon reminded them of one thing: the humans could still be there. But humanity, too, began to fracture beneath its own power. Soldiers questioned their orders, engineers whispered about the morality of their actions, and civilians on the outer colonies prayed for the end of the war they had already won. Admiral Core stood in her quarters, staring at a holographic display of the worlds they had erased, hundreds of lights dimming one by one. Her reflection stared back at her like a ghost. We've become the thing they feared, she whispered. A storm that doesn't know when to stop. She closed her eyes and remembered the council floor, remembered the sound of her people being humiliated before 1,000 alien eyes, and the anger that had carried her here. But now that anger felt hollow. What happens when vengeance is complete? She asked herself, but the stars outside had no answer. Then, on the edges of known space, something unexpected happened, a signal, faint, fragile, human, a message that originated not from a fleet or a command post, but from a child's transmission beacon on one of the colonies destroyed during the Council's first strike against Earth decades ago. It was a recording, the voice small, innocent. If you hear this, tell my mom I'm okay, tell her the stars are beautiful. The message looped endlessly until Admiral Core heard it in her cabin, and as the words played over and over, the admiral of the most powerful fleet in existence sat down and wept. Not for her enemies, not for her soldiers, but for the children who would grow up under a sky of silence, a sky humanity itself had darkened. In that moment, she made her decision, one that would change everything that came after. She walked back to the command bridge, her voice steady once again. Transmit to all fleets, she said. This war is over, not because they surrendered, but because we remember who we are. Her officers looked at her in disbelief. The council is broken, they can't fight back. Exactly, she said. And when the powerful can't fight back, that's when justice turns into cruelty. She turned to the stars, her voice softer. We're done teaching lessons. And for the first time in a century, Terran engines began to cool, fleets slowed, and across the galaxy, the darkness began to fade, replaced not with peace, but with the quiet promise of something new, the beginning of memory, not revenge, and the faint light of forgiveness rising slowly from the ashes of judgment. The message that Admiral Core sent rippled through the Terran fleet like a tremor through the bones of creation, her command. This war is over, echoed across 1,000 encrypted channels, and for a moment, no one moved, no one dared to breathe. The soldiers who had lived in the shadow of vengeance stood frozen before their consoles, unsure if they had heard correctly. For decades, every mission, every order, every victory had been driven by a single truth: retaliation. And now that truth had been taken from them by the woman who had led them through fire, many officers stared at the transmission in disbelief, some in anger, some in relief, and some in fear, for when vengeance ends, purpose falters, and for a species that had built its identity around survival through defiance. That silence felt heavier than war itself. On the bridge of the Erebus, Kor stood alone, her reflection cast against the dark void beyond, the stars distant and cold, her voice quiet as she spoke to her crew. We did what we had to, but we will not become what they were. Her officers saluted in silence, for though they didn't all understand, they trusted her, and that trust was all that remained of humanity's soul. Across Terran space, fleets began to halt their advance, their engines powering down one by one. The galaxy, unaware of what had been decided, trembled in confusion. The Council remnants, hiding in shattered worlds and broken moons, waited for the next blow, but none came. Instead, for the first time in months, their skies were still. No shadows moved across their suns, no whispers filled their comms, no stars vanished. It was peace. But not the kind that came from treaties or words. It was the kind that came from exhaustion. From the realization that the line between justice and destruction had already blurred too far. On Earth, people looked up at the night sky and saw something strange. The stars that had been dimmed by war flickered again, faintly, slowly, as if the universe itself was trying to remember how to breathe. Marcus Hale watched the flicker from the Terran command tower, his hands clasped behind his back, his once fierce eyes now tired, the weight of 100 billion souls pressing on his conscience. You stopped them, he said softly when Kor's hologram appeared beside him. You ended what I started. She met his gaze without pride, only weariness. You began justice, she replied. I ended anger. Hale nodded, though his expression was unreadable. And do you think they'll forgive us? He asked. She hesitated, her voice low. Forgiveness isn't what we earned, Marcus, it's what we give. There was a long silence, the kind that carried both regret and understanding. Hale turned back toward the stars. Then let that be our legacy, not wrath, but restraint. His reflection in the glass looked older, smaller, like a man who had finally seen what vengeance truly costs. Send the recall signal, he said finally, bring them all home. The recall signal left Earth like a pulse of light, invisible to alien sensors but felt by every Terran vessel no matter how far. It traveled faster than thought, faster than light, reaching ships hidden in the black, soldiers asleep in cryo, colonies on the edges of forgotten systems. Every human, every machine, every drone received the same command. Return, and they obeyed. Across the void, thousands of black ships began their journey home, their paths glowing faintly against the darkness, a sight so vast that even alien astronomers on distant worlds watched it in awe, not as an invasion, but as a retreat of gods. The galaxy didn't celebrate. They simply watched, too afraid to believe it was over, because the quiet that followed humanity had always been the most dangerous kind. Yet not everyone among the Terrans agreed. In the depths of the Leviathan-class destroyer Odin's Wraith, a commander named Jalen Frost refused the recall, his eyes burning with the same fury that once consumed all of Earth. They destroyed our people, he snarled, our children, our future, and now we're supposed to just stop. His second-in-command looked at him carefully. The order came from Admiral Kor herself. Frost's expression twisted with rage. Then she's forgotten who we are, he whispered. I haven't. And with a flick of his hand, he severed the recall signal, turning his ship toward the last known location of a surviving Council world. If they won't finish it, I will, he said, his voice trembling with conviction, his fleet of 40 ships following behind him into the black, unaware that they were walking into the final lesson humanity would ever give. Kor received word of Frost's betrayal hours later, and the color drained from her face. He'll undo everything, she said, her tone low but sharp. Prepare pursuit coordinates. The Erebus shifted course, its engines roaring to life. Admiral, one officer asked hesitantly, if we find them, what do we do? Kor closed her eyes for a moment, then answered, we remind them that humanity obeys its conscience, not its fury. It took 3 days to catch them, and when they did, the stars around Frost's fleet burned red, weapons primed, his voice thundered through the comms. "You were the best of us once, Admiral. But now you're just afraid to finish what they started." Kor replied, calm and steady, "No, Commander. I'm afraid of what happens when we stop remembering who we were." Frost sneered. "You've gone soft, you've forgotten Earth's pain, and you've forgotten its heart," she said, her final words quiet but resolute. "Stand down." When Frost refused, Kor gave the order no Terran had ever wanted to hear: fire. The Erebus unleashed its full power, not as a weapon of destruction but as a weapon of mercy, a containment blast of folded light that froze space itself, locking Frost's entire fleet in temporal stasis, forever unmoving, trapped in a moment that would never end, his final expression. A mixture of defiance and realization. Forever captured in the glassy void, Kor lowered her head, whispering, "May history forgive you for remembering too well." The Erebus turned away, the light fading behind them, and for the first time, there were no enemies left in the galaxy, no targets, no opposition. Only the echo of what humanity had done and the silence that came after. Months passed, and the galaxy slowly began to heal. The surviving worlds rebuilt their skies, their leaders rebuilt their faith, but not their arrogance, for they had learned that peace was not granted by councils or treaties. It was enforced by understanding, and the humans, those terrifying, brilliant creatures of passion and contradiction, had become their reminder. The council itself was gone, replaced by an alliance of equal voices. No longer a rule of fear but a promise of humility. And, though Earth was never asked to return, its presence hung above them like a shadow of protection. Unseen but always felt, they knew humanity still watched, guarding from afar, unseen sentinels among the stars. In her final years, Admiral Kor walked the plains of Mars, where cities once built for war had become fields of quiet gardens. She carried no rank now, no insignia, just a simple pendant engraved with words from Marcus Hale's last speech before his death. "We do not burn worlds to be feared, we burn arrogance so peace can live." She sat beneath the red sky and watched the sunrise, faint but warm, and for the first time in a lifetime of battles, she smiled. The stars above no longer felt like wounds, they felt like promises, reminders that even in the vastness of space, humanity had found a way to be both destroyer and savior, both wrath and mercy. And as the twin moons rose, she whispered to the wind, "Let them remember us not for what we destroyed, but for what we chose to stop." Years later, the galaxy was quiet again, not the tense quiet of fear but the deep stillness that comes when history finally exhales. Stars burned peacefully across the dark, and for the first time in centuries, no one spoke the word war. Yet every world, every station, every civilization carried within it the echo of one name, Earth. It had become both legend and warning, a myth whispered to children and remembered by leaders. "Do not forget the humans," they said, "for forgetting them is how the galaxy nearly ended." The council's ruins drifted among the stars, broken shards of crystal and metal glinting faintly against the light of new suns, and beneath that silence, humanity lived unseen, far beyond the borders of what the galaxy now called the Dead Zone, an area forbidden to all ships, a place where even light seemed reluctant to travel. They called it the Silent Sector, but the truth was simpler: it was home. Deep within that silence, Earth had changed. Cities that once reached into the sky now stood half-buried in forests. Oceans glittered again, clean and blue. The scars of industry replaced by fields of silver grass that swayed under wind towers humming softly. Humanity had retreated not to hide but to heal. They had become something the galaxy could no longer define. Neither conquerors nor victims, neither angels nor monsters, just watchers. A civilization older and quieter, patient enough to let the stars forget and wise enough to remember everything. The Terran fleet no longer patrolled for enemies. Their ships orbited peacefully, watching, ensuring the galaxy's balance, but their weapons remained, silent, unseen, sleeping like dragons beneath calm seas. Reminders that peace existed only because humanity had chosen it, not because the galaxy deserved it. On Mars, where red dust once carried the weight of war, now stood the Hall of Memory, a circular monument built into the cliffs overlooking the Valles Marineris. It was simple, vast, and solemn. Inside it, holographic flames burned eternally for every life lost, human and alien alike. Carved above the entrance were the words of Admiral Kor: "Vengeance ends where memory begins." Every year, people came from across human space to stand in silence, To remember the cost of justice, to remember that peace had not been given, it had been taken and then forgiven. On one quiet morning, an old woman with silver hair and calm eyes stood before the central flame. Her name was Elira Kaur, granddaughter of the Admiral, her voice soft as she spoke to the air. "You kept them safe, grandmother," she whispered. "But what happens when they forget again?" The flame flickered, and though she knew it was only the wind, she almost imagined it answering her. "Then we remind them." Meanwhile, beyond human space, the galaxy rebuilt itself slowly. Worlds that had once trembled under fear of Terran retribution now flourished again. New alliances formed, not under domination but under mutual caution. The era of arrogance was gone, replaced by humility. Every species had learned that power meant nothing without empathy. But still, the myths persisted. Miners in the outer rim spoke of seeing black ships moving silently beyond the edge of their scanners. Traders swore that in the void, they heard human voices whispering warnings through the static. "Stay kind," they said, "or the stars will dim again." And though the governments of the galaxy denied it, deep down, they all believed, because fear had turned to reverence, and reverence had turned to faith. Humanity had become the galaxy's unspoken conscience, the unseen judge that reminded all who ruled that peace was not their right. It was their responsibility. In the heart of this new galaxy, a small world named Lysera thrived, a young civilization barely a century into spaceflight. Their leaders taught their children the old stories, of a time when the sky burned and the stars themselves went silent. Why did the humans do it? One child asked his teacher, the elder smiled sadly. "Because they were betrayed," he said, and they answered the only way they knew how. The boy frowned, but did they forgive? The teacher looked up at the sky where the faint outline of an ancient Terran satellite still orbited, its signal pulsing once every year. "They forgave enough to let us live," he said, and that was answer enough, for in every culture that followed, humanity's name became the word for both wrath and mercy, the dual edge of survival, the truth that peace without respect is only waiting for silence to return. Back on Earth, Marcus Hale's monument stood beneath the rebuilt United Terran Command. A single marble statue of a man looking toward the stars, no weapons, no armor, just open hands, his final speech engraved below. "We learned that justice cannot come from rage, and peace cannot come from fear. We burned the stars once, so the next generation would never need to light another match." Generations recited those words in their schools. They became a promise, a creed, that humanity would never again be the first to strike, but also never again the first to bow. And yet, in the deepest reaches of the silent sector, where the Aegis array still slept, a signal pulsed quietly every decade, a soft whisper carried across eternity. "We are watching, not as a threat, but as a reminder." It was the voice of humanity itself, echoing through time, letting the galaxy know that balance would always have guardians, unseen and unyielding, because peace, left unguarded, becomes arrogance again, and arrogance always remembers too late. Beneath that silent promise, Earth turned slowly, its blue light shimmering against the void, a single living world surrounded by ghosts of its own legend, the last flame in a galaxy that had once tried to extinguish it, and now bowed to its light. As the centuries passed, new civilizations rose, and the name Terran became myth, their ships long gone, their voices faded into the static between stars. But every time an empire grew too proud, every time a council began to think itself untouchable, there came a night when their skies flickered, their lights dimmed for just a moment, and they remembered the lesson written in the ruins of the old galaxy: do not mistake silence for absence, for in that silence lives the memory of those who shattered the stars.